Today, we are in Northern Virginia and headed up to the highest point in Arlington County. Hi, I'm Scott Marthaler. Welcome to another episode of Rooftops of America. Over the last couple seasons, we've explored state high points across the U.S. And in that time, I've learned quite a bit of fascinating stories, historical and geographical idiosyncrasies that I want to share with you. Today, we're going to start with a place called Miners Hill. Let's go highpointing. Located near Falls Church, on the boundary of Arlington and Fairfax counties, Miners Hill is named after the Miner family, who purchased the land in 1789. The hill lies on the border, where two Virginia geological regions, the Piedmont and Coastal Plain, transition from one into the other. Known as the Fall Line, it stretches through the length of the state. Now this is the point where seagoing vessels can go no further upriver. They'll encounter obstacles such as rapids or falls. English settlement would be primarily focused on the eastern coastal plain. And the developing Virginia economy would be in cash crops, such as cotton or tobacco, which led to the development of plantations, which in turn led to an increased use of slavery. The fall line effect wouldn't be surmounted for well over 100 years, until a more robust infrastructure was developed in the way of canals and roadways. This geological feature even impacted the eventual placement of the nation's capital, with its western side bordering it. One of the things that Miners Hill does a good job illustrating is the rather arbitrary nature of highpointing. Throughout history, as boundaries shift or better measurements are gained for these locations, the title of highest point can change as well. For most of its existence, Miners Hill was a peak of no real concern. In fact, when the Native Americans lived here, the trail that ran adjacent to the hill was actually a lot more important than the hill itself. It wasn't until lines were put on a map that this peak gained any standing. In 1790, the Residence Act was signed, establishing a federal district of 100 square miles, with contributions from the states of Maryland and Virginia. This area was to be the new nation's capital and would be named the District of Columbia. With the swipe of a pen, Miners Hill became its highest point. The hill would play a role in two 19th century U.S. wars, the first in 1812, when the U.S. declared war on the British Empire for the illegal impressment of U.S. sailors and also blockading neutral shipping from France, an enemy of Britain's at the time. Unfortunately for the U.S., while they did declare the war, they were ill prepared to fight it, suffering numerous setbacks and defeats. In 1814, the war came to the district when the British launched a raid to strike at the capital. American troops tried to halt the tide at Bladensburg in Maryland, but other than a valiant stand by U.S. Marines and sailors, the militiamen were routed, opening the way for British forces to march on Washington. In a coincidence, the Virginia militia that was to reinforce U.S. troops at Bladensburg was under the command of Colonel George Miner, a member of the family that the hill is named for. Now, the Virginians actually never made it to the battle, having been caught up in a supply snafu in D.C. when being issued their muskets and flints. Instead, though, they went to the Navy Yard, salvaged all the gunpowder they could, and they brought it back here for safety. The city was in a panic, with people and militia troops pouring through it to get to the safety of the heights in Virginia and Maryland. One of those evacuees was the First Lady herself, Dolly Madison, whose diligence saved several national treasures from the enemy, most notably the Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington. When the British arrived, they set fire to the city, destroying significant portions of it. From this point right here, you would have been able to see the inferno that had engulfed the city. As one witness would later state,
"At first, I thought the world was on fire, and such flame I have never seen since."
Falls Church and Miners Hill were crawling with refugees that had escaped from the city, including President Madison and some of his staff. Legend has it that Dolly Madison would spend several nights here with the Miner family. The British didn't stay, though, marching back to their ships after the burning, and Miners Hill would soon return to its rural nature. In 1846, with another swipe of the pen, the hill's reign as the district high point would come to an end, with the retrocession of 31 square miles of territory on the south of the Potomac being returned to Virginia. About a mile and a half away from Miners Hill, you can still find a remnant of the original district. This is the westmost cornerstone that was laid down 56 years prior. Things would remain relatively calm for another 15 years. But in the spring of 1861, war erupted once again, this time between the states themselves. Miners Hill would play a part in this conflict as well. When the U.S. Civil War began, this area here was heavily contested. The Union capital, Washington, D.C., was literally on the doorstep of the Confederacy, so controlling these heights was advantageous to either side. And for the first year and a half, this area swapped hands numerous times as the fortunes of one side or the other would ebb and flow. By the latter half of 1862, the hill was firmly in Union hands and part of Fortress Washington. Fortifications, like this one at nearby Fort Ward in Alexandria, were built to defend the capital. Miners Hill itself had numerous encampments in its vicinity, and as one of the higher points in the area, it had a tall tower built on it to observe Confederate troop movements in nearby Fairfax. It was not a comfortable posting, as one Union soldier wrote.
We encamped on Miners Hill in a clearing in the midst of a pine wood. We are not allowed to make any fires, and it is cold as Greenland nights. We are encamped on the outposts, there being nothing but the pickets between us and the enemy.
For the curious, the Mary Riley Stiles Library in Falls Church is home to an 1880s colored lithograph of the hill, showing its time as a Civil War encampment. After the war, the Miner family, who were secessionists, fell into ruin and lost ownership of the hill, though it still bears their name even today. The hill would revert back to its pastoral nature for another 80 years. In the 1950s, though, D.C. and Northern Virginia grew substantially, and 10 years later, in the 60s, this entire area was developed for housing. Nowadays, it is a bustling Northern Virginia suburb, and Miners Hill is recognized by a small park and sign adjacent to the summit. In 2016, one of the last structures dating from the time of the Civil War was demolished to make way for more modern housing. While Miners Hill's reign as the district high point is far in the past, this place still has a unique claim to fame. It is the highest point in the smallest self-governing county in the USA. There isn't much physical effort needed to get to the top of this hill. You can park pretty much right next to it. The biggest challenge may be finding it on the map. The coordinates and street address can be found below in the episode description. And here we are, at the top of Miners Hill. Coming in at 464 feet, this is the highest point in the county of Arlington. If you have any interest in the history of the District Columbia, or the U.S. Civil War, or even county high points in general, you may want to check this one out. I'm Scott Marthaler. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Rooftops of America. I'll see you soon.